Um, yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Tracy, if you'll give us an opening prayer, and then I'm just going to kind of mute myself until I actually at my house and everything. Neal can just take over from there.
All right. Our dear Father in heaven, we're thankful to be gathered here tonight to learn more about ham radio, and we pray that thy Spirit will be with us so that we may learn how to be more prepared and check this out. And we're thankful for all of the things Cameron does to help us in preparing and spiritually and physically. And we're thankful for this wonderful group of friends that come together and work together towards building a Zion heart. And we're thankful for the gospel. And we say this in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If somebody will keep an eye on chat and whatnot, I probably won't see it. So I got the presentation up as we go through this. So feel free to ask questions. My goal is not specifically to convince you to get your ham radio license, although that's one of the messages I'll communicate. It's to show you options of what you can do, why you'd want to do it, and talk through communication in a preparedness situation. So with that, I'll just dive in. So, all right, how do I click there? Okay. So the first question is, well, we've got communication now. We got phones, we got cell phones, we've got internet. Isn't that good enough? Anybody have thoughts? Why do
Gonna go down.
Okay. Why would it go down?
Oh, we have no control over, how it's up or down. We have zero control.
That's true. Let's see if this works like it's supposed to. So yeah, we're so dependent on cell towers these days. Cell phones. Our cell phones are a radio. They're a radio that operates on a frequency and communicate with antennas that are on towers. Those towers require power. Most towers have some kind of battery or generator backups. Can be as short as 4 hours, as long as several days, but in any case, they're not unlimited. So, and when a tower goes down, now, if that's the one your phone reaches, now your phone doesn't work, you don't have internet, whatnot. The other thing is the cell system in emergencies often get overwhelmed. One of the things they teach us is that in an emergency, avoid doing voice calls if you can. Text messages are much more compact. They use a whole lot less resources, and you can often send and receive text when you could not make a call. So keep that in mind. The internet, everything's interconnected. It's dependent on power and transmission lines, especially if we lose power. Ultimately, that's going to go down and things are going to go dark. So, and they require towers and servers and communication and systems to all keep running. First question is so why do we need to communicate? Who do we want to communicate to? In your case, why are you here? Who is it you want to talk to in an emergency situation?
Well, obviously the book clubs. No, just kidding.
Okay. Book club members, that's a good one.
Like the town next to me, since we don't have a whole lot of resources here in Malta, being able to communicate with like Burley, a little bit bigger towns, kind of our stake boundaries kind of a thing.
So nearby friends and neighbors and family.
Yeah, mainly.
And I heard someone else.
My family is all in Utah and Washington, so quite a ways away from me. So just some way to
far away family.
Far away family.
Okay. Those are all good points. So communication, maybe we want to just know what's going on a local, national, international level. We talked about, we didn't talk about this, but maybe you just need to talk to people in the same household because now you're evacuated, you're separate cars. What was the best method for that? Maybe it's just different family members, and you're like, I have a half a dozen of my daughters and son-in-laws and grandkids that live in the Utah Valley area. So they're in a, what I would call line of sight or nearby area. And then of course we have distant people that we want to communicate with. And in my case, I'm down in Utah Valley. I have one married daughter that's up in Logan and another one that's off in Wyoming. And it's a different need to reach that group. So what I thought is I'd spend just, not to get anybody overwhelmed, but talk a little bit about how radios and communication works, some of the fundamentals of it, because then we can talk about why different radios are needed for different things. So virtually all communication happens because of electromagnetic waves, waves that change polarity between positive and negative. When I'm talking, my vocal cords are vibrating, creating sound waves that then get transmitted to your ear, which is attuned to that level and knows how to decode that sound. Likewise, the light that you're seeing is a wave that's being reflected, and your eyes are a receiver that knows how to decode that. Well, these waves are either really short and really fast, or they're very, very long and really slow. And you see on this chart that different kinds of radios work at different places. On the far left, we would have like our AM broadcast band. So like KSL 1160 is considered a fairly long wave. It's in what we call the HF or high frequency band. And then you work your way over, you get into cell phones. They're a very short wave, work at short distances. Microwave is actually a wave. You put out enough power, you can cook something. Well, the same is true with a radio or whatnot. If you put out enough power and enough wave, you can cook something with it. So there's dangers you have to be careful of. And then as you move over, you get into the light spectrum and eventually, you know, into the super tiny waves. But this just gives you an idea of some of the different waves and different kinds of communication that happen at different points. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's see. So in order for communication to happen, you need a transmitter with an antenna that broadcasts a wave, and information's embedded in that wave. And then you need an antenna on the other end and a receiver that's tuned to the same wave. There's all kinds of gospel analogies about how the spirit works and whatnot. It's the same way. The spirit can be broadcasting a huge message, and if we're not tuned to it, we won't hear it. Likewise, there's background noise in radios, and if the signal or the strength of that wave isn't great enough to get above the noise level, you won't hear it either. So for example, I happen to have a ham radio running over here. And if I turn it up, you hear a lot of noise. And I have to find a station so there you can see there's a signal, and it's barely above the noise level. But it's above the noise level, so with some tweaking, I can dig out that signal and be able to receive the message that's being sent. And we do that by narrowing the frequency that we're looking at, by suppressing some of the noises, by tuning in exactly. And same with the spirit, you know, you've got to be in tune, you got to get rid of the noise, and make sure that signal's coming in strong. So the radio works by a sender and a receiver, and information is encoded in this wave different ways. So AM radio, for example, stands for amplitude modulation. So what we do is we don't change the width of this wave, but we change the power between the cycles. And doing that, we can encode the music, the sound, the voice. FM radio, on the other hand, is called frequency modulation. And what it does is it changes the width of the wave and encodes data doing that. And then there's what's called pulse width modulation that actually does both. And it's amazing what it does and how it does it, but it encodes a lot of information. The other thing that is important to kind of understand is a long wave that takes a long time to cycle. Like AM radio is up in what we call the 80-meter band. It means it takes the wave travels 80 meters. So what's that, 240 feet or so, for it to change from positive to negative back to positive. That's a long wave. It's called, and that's in what we call the HF or high frequency band. A wave that takes that long to change, it's harder to send a lot of information on because that wave takes a long time to move. Whereas the wave, cell phones operate in what we call the gigahertz range. That wave is, it travels a fraction of a millimeter to do that distance change. So the amount of information you can send is that much greater because it's moving so fast that you can pack a lot into it. But it has limitations. The cell phone, it won't go around the world. It won't go over the mountain. It's again, a line of sight, and you have to have a lot of power and be fairly close. All right, let's see. The frequency band is regulated and chopped up into different pieces. Ham radio is this green color here, down here. So we get privileges. There's pieces scattered around. We get privileges scattered throughout the spectrum, and the rest of this is, satellites have certain frequencies, microwaves, cell phones, private companies can license certain frequencies, public broadcast and TV is on different frequencies. And so those are licensed and controlled by the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission. Some are free. So like the handheld radios that we used to take to Disneyland before we had cell phones, so we could talk to each other. Those are on a frequency and a power level that you were allowed without a license. Some require licenses. So we'll talk about that. In the case of ham radio and others, the frequencies are broken into low frequency, medium, high frequency, which is, it's still very, very long and slow, then very high, ultra high, and then microwave. Very high and ultra high are used for short distance line of sight, and the HF and above is used for the things that go around the world. And we'll talk about how it does that in another slide here. But when you hear the term HF or shortwave, they're talking about these waves that can go around a long distance. You may know that KSL, for example, most of the time you probably don't hear it, but sometimes KSL broadcasts and people pick it up in, California, Idaho, all over the place because it's in this upper range, and at certain times that wave bounces and goes a long, long ways. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this. So how fast the signal is half my stuff's blocked out. So is how often the wave changes. The VHF and UHF is what most of our short range communication is done with. Ham radio is an AM broadcaster way up there. FM's kind of in the middle. FM isn't designed to go more than line of sight, so they put towers on mountains to broadcast to do that. The long, slow ones, I could take the HF bands, they will bounce and go around. And this is why. The atmosphere has electromagnetic bands in it. There's actually 7 or 8 of them. They're not all depicted here. And what happens is the sun puts out energy that ionizes the atmosphere. These different bands ionize, and it creates like a barrier. So when the atmosphere is ionized because the sunspots and whatnot, then these long signals, instead of going like this red line here that goes up and out, well, it'll hit that layer and it'll reflect back down. or it'll hit a higher layer and it'll affect even further. So with my ham radio, pretty much any time, any day, better at night, because that's when I get the higher layers and longer skips. I can pretty well talk to, regions on the other side of the world. It's amazing what you can do. During the day, when the ionized band gets lower, then it's harder to go as far because it bounces sooner and doesn't go as good. Yeah, now I went that far. So, and your cell phone, its signal's going so fast that it just goes out of the atmosphere. It doesn't bounce off anything. And so that's why it's line of sight.
So quick question on that with the times of day and everything. So where like on this side of the world is night, but the other side of the world is day, it's not really it matters where it's transmitting from, right? Because like which layer it's hitting and refracting from?
It's both sides. So
okay.
The best time in and you'll see when I get to my communications plans with my family, the best time seems to be as we transition from day to night. We're able to reach more places because on the other side of the earth, they're doing the same thing, and that
so it's all something that you can calculate through and figure out.
Actually websites that'll show you what the bands are like and where you're skipping to, because it monitors who's talking to who and what can be heard. But the key thing is just to understand that we just went through what we call the sunspot minimum, when the sunspots were low and we're coming out and the sunspots are starting to pick up. During the minimum, some of the bands in ham radio don't go hardly anywhere, but now the sunspots are picking up. During the day, certain bands are really good because they're bouncing lower, and during the night other bands are good because they're going further. So in my communication plan, I have the family gets on the radio at like 9 in the morning, and for 10 or 15 minutes they'll try to call on various frequencies, and then they'll do it again at 9 at night to try to communicate, and that's to try to capture some of this change.
Gotcha.
So we need different devices for different situations. So inexpensive handhelds or mobile radios are good for local communication. And you've seen, I was just digging, where'd my you see my screen instead of my picture. I've got 72-hour kit here I'm digging into. And inside that 72-hour kit, these kits are probably 10 or 15 years old. I have, these are the old Midland. I don't know if you can see me at the same time you can see the presentation. Am I showing?
Yeah, I can see you. It's like in a little thumbnail. Yeah.
Okay, you see this little handy talkie. This is a Midland Extra Talk is what it's called. And they were the family radio service. Before cell phones, if you went to Disneyland, you'd give different family groups this so you could talk to each other. And they're good for, families traveling down the road, things like that, where you don't need to communicate very far and you don't want to have a license. So then it takes, in my background here, this radio over here that I was messing with, this is they call an HF, high frequency long range radio. They're more expensive. It takes a little more to understand what's going on, but this radio will broadcast on 7 or 8 different bands, and I can communicate, all over the world given the need. So some other examples I took, I stopped screen sharing for a second so you see me. Let me grab, if you don't practice, then it doesn't do you any good. So I had the opportunity, I was looking to learn a certain skill. There's a way with radios that you can connect it to a computer and send email. And in the process of discovering that, I ran into a group that goes to Honduras every year, twice a year. And they go to these remote villages to give doctor and dental services. But these remote villages, they, the groups takes their own generators, their own gas to run their medical equipment. There's no cell towers, there's no cell phone service. So all the communication is done with radios. So when I found out and got excited and felt prompted to go, we went down. Oh, it was right before COVID. We actually got out of Honduras 2 days before they shut the airlines down. So it was a little close, but this is a portable HF radio. This kit's got all the antennas and wires. It's got a battery to operate it. It's got solar panels to recharge. And then with a computer, all our communication back to the base, the doctor's communication to arrange for, planes to fly in and pick up patients that needed to go get surgery. All that was done by ham radio. And I got a chance to go actually practice it and see how it works. And we would communicate from Honduras to there's a big station in Texas that actually has some big rotating antennas that he would point at us. They tend to be the best station, but at times I couldn't get him and I was going to Greenland, and then that person to pick up the email, the radio broadcast through Windmail, and then he would put it on the net and send it out as the email. It's all automatic by the computers. And then it would show up at the base back in Honduras, having gone halfway around the world to get there. But it was good to go practice and learn that. And I could show you outside if we have time, we'll go do that. But some other things. Now let me see, how do I get back? There we go. The presentation. So the question is, that was supposed to be this one. Where do we start? The first thing you got to just do is decide who I need to communicate with. Why do I want to communicate? And that'll determine what kind of communication equipment you get. Second, you got to make a plan. And this is a plan you share with your family and friends, whatnot, because it's great to have all this equipment, but if there's nobody on the other side to hear it, it's not going to do any good. So for example, I have 11 kids and 9, soon to be 10 are married. I actually made these kits with radios and instructions and batteries and solar panels. We'll go through it a little bit later. And gave one of these to each of my married children that were in the Utah Valley, Salt Lake area that I can reach with line of sight, and did a larger kit that we'll look at for the ones that are out of town, and then encourage them to get their ham radio license. I actually have an 8-year-old granddaughter that's working on her license, so anyone can do it. Step 3 is based on your plan and who you need to talk to, you can select your equipment. And maybe you don't need to talk to people far away, so all you want to do is listen. Well, then there's some inexpensive options for listening, and we'll go through some of that. And then step 4 is you need to actually go share your plan and practice it on occasion. So we'll, on a conference weekend, say, okay, get your radios out. Let's see if we can talk to each other and do some practicing. So we talked about this. Think about, what are your communication needs? Is it just, everybody's at home because your kids are young, you don't really need to talk to anybody. So some simple handheld radios, that you can put in various vehicles when you're traveling or whatnot is good enough. Do you need to talk to people that are in different homes scattered around the region? That's a different radio. And if you need to communicate long distance or want to monitor what's going on, those are different needs. Okay. So what's in a plan? And I will post this presentation and a bunch of sample documents up on Learning Zion so you can download them. So you can get to these links and whatnot. But a good plan, determine one, who you're going to talk to. Make a contact list with both local and out of area phone numbers, email addresses, etc. Then how are you going to communicate? So, in our case, if you're living in our house, people know in a disaster, the first place we meet is out front. If that's not safe, we go down the street about a block to a common area. If that's not safe, then we meet over at the church. And we communicate by foot and whatnot. Once we're safe, then we'll kick in our other radios and start talking to extended family members. Then decide when are you going to communicate, because it doesn't do any good to get on the radio and start calling if nobody's listening. So we have established times, and we'll show you an example of that. I wonder if it'll let me bring that up without sharing. Let's see. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. So we'll have it in there. Okay. So equipment. First off, to listen to what's going on, there's some options. If you want to listen to the police, fire, and the local emergency, then you need a scanner of some kind. And in this case, it should be what they call a trunking scanner, because in the old days, the police had a fixed frequency and everybody talked on that frequency, but only one person could talk at a time. But all modern police departments and whatnot actually have a whole, they might have 10 or 15 frequencies, and the radio will automatically choose the one that's free to talk to the other side and establish that. And you need what's called a trunking scanner in order to monitor the changes in frequency as it jumps around. And this Bearcats, these are some options that are possible. I have one in the basement I wasn't able to dig out yet, but whatnot. Then for monitoring national events, you need a shortwave radio with single sideband. And this yellow one here, I don't own it. It's out on Amazon. It's $49. Supposedly it'll recharge with solar, plus it has a crank, the ability to listen to a lot of stuff. Quality I can't guarantee, but it was an interesting one because of all those features. Then this one on the right, this GP7, I actually have the older model, the GP5 right here, and I keep the batteries out of it so that the batteries don't contaminate it if they go bad. It's got an antenna, everything built in the manual on how to operate it. And it's capable of listening to all those ham radio bands and all those AM broadcast band. The interesting thing is, like BBC of London, you can pretty well find and listen to anytime, day or night, because they broadcast on many frequencies, and usually you can find one of them. So even if power's out here, you would have the ability to potentially listen in and see what's happening on a national scale. So that GP7 is a really good one to have in your kit. And these are for listening only. So, but it lets you know what's going on, and they're a little less expensive.
So that one, what kind of batteries is it? Is there like a solar option or anything with that?
So the GP7 does not. It takes regular batteries, and I think it takes a charging adapter. And what I've done is I've modified it so I can run it off the battery that I have in my radio kit,
Gotcha.
recharging and whatnot. I'll show that in a little bit. So I store extra batteries. The best batteries, it's just AA. Let me go grab the best batteries to store. They're right here somewhere. Not those. It's these Energizer Ultimate Lithium, AA or AAA, depending on what your needs are. The lithium don't have the problems where the lead acid, get corroded and go bad.
Yeah.
They have a 20-year shelf life. They're not damaged when you get them hot and cold, like some others are. And they'll store forever. So that's what I've got in my emergency storage, these ultimate lithium batteries for these devices.
Sweet.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying that's sweet because that answers a different question that I had. I mean, not on ham radios or anything, but I've always wondered, like, what kind of batteries do I need to store?
Yeah. And then actually, do I have the other batteries that are in all my kits? They're not inexpensive, but these Dakota Lithium LiFePO 4 lithium batteries are.
Is that like a whole brick of something, or like is that the box of them?
You'd find these like in it's a contained one, like in your battery backup power supplies for computers.
Uh-huh.
I think it's called a BL3 size battery. 12 volt, 7 amp hour. This one happens to have a unit on top that gives me connectors to do different things with a solar charge controller. It's part of this kit I'll go through. It's kind of the base for everything I do, because I can recharge my cell phones off of this. I can recharge my radios off of this. I can recharge this battery with a solar panel that's included. It's the basis for pretty much everything I do.
So question, if this takes you off course, but like EMP danger or whatever, like does that battery or do ham radios even work after an EMP?
So the danger is when the EMP happens. After the blast, there's no residual effect per se. Something's damaged is damaged, and things that work will work.
Gotcha.
So what you'll see is, I'm going to stop screen sharing again for a second because you're asking good questions. So all of my equipment is stored. See these ammo cans? I've ground down the paint off of the top edge here. Let me take this lid off. This lid originally had a rubber gasket in here. This is an electromagnetic seal. And by putting this seal in, and you have to grind the paint off underneath it, it maintains a constant contact. This becomes a Faraday cage, and it protects it from EMP.
Gotcha.
So my radios and batteries and my emergency stuff is stored in cans that are all protected like this.
How much would you say like just a can is before you start upgrading it and everything?
Okay, let me get back to this presentation and we will jump ahead and see.
Yeah, sorry. If you want to like go sequentially, if it's coming up, that's totally fine.
Yeah, let's see. So we'll get there. We'll follow this a little bit. It's on the next screen, I think. So as I mentioned, my 72-hour kits have the simple FRS radio system, the handy talkies, with some batteries that are not in it that are kept separate. And then my 72-hour kit also has that shortwave, the GP5 in my case, but GP7 is what you'd be getting. So that I have the ability, if we have to grab 72-hour kits and go, I can listen in and kind of find out what's happening on an international scene. And national, you can pick up the National Weather Service and other things with that too. And then each family in the Wasatch Front has this box that actually has a Baofeng radio, and I'll give you that information, but it's this very small, it looks like the family radio service, but it actually broadcasts on ham frequencies, several frequencies, including the family radio, the GMRS, and there's another one that's a legal frequency. So it has the ability to do ham plus the other, and I've programmed it so that the FRS channels are programmed in. The family just looks on their sheet and knows what channel to go to. And then a trunking scanner. And then I have, of course, my base station with its big antenna, and it's not stored in an EMP proof can. And I've done other things, but it's potentially at risk. So I have another one that's stored in an EMP proof can along with my mobile stuff. So I'll give you examples of this, but here is what I call the local communication go kit with prices and links and everything else if you want to go build your own.
I love it.
$625 for all of this. There's some things that may not be needed, but this is your shopping list if you're just going to go try to duplicate it. And so it's in this presentation. we can look at some of this. So we talked about the bow frame radio. So the solar panel is this fold up 60-watt panel that is capable of recharging that battery in 5 or 6 or 7 hours. And it comes with all the cords and connectors to do a lot of things, including recharge your cell phone, but we recharge it off this battery. You know, I use these called Write in the Rain notebooks. They're actually waterproof with a mechanical pencil that's waterproof, so you can, you know, take notes and write down what needs to happen. Every kid in it has the family. This is the communication plan. It tells you how to, you know, who to contact, when to contact. It gives you instructions on how to tune the radio, what channels have what on it. It tells you how to hook the solar panel up to recharge. You know, it's kind of the idiot guide of how to do this. And I will actually, okay, can I get this screen go down? If I go to, yeah, get stuff out of the way. Here we go. So I'll include this document, but this is the plan. And it talks about how to gather, what to watch for in the first page. Then here's our communication. Mine has primary and secondary contacts out of state. Talks about which channel to try to communicate, what hours of the day. For our area, for those people that are far away, it tells you, you know, 40-meter band, go here and, you know, attempt to call at these times. And you may not connect every day. You may not connect in the morning. Maybe you'll catch it in the evening, but between the family, we should be able to eventually get everybody connected up. Instructions on how to tune it if you're trying to tune to talk to somebody else. With these line of sight radios, there are antennas mounted on mountaintops called repeaters. And you talk on one frequency and listen on another. And by talking to that antenna tower, it turns around and rebroadcasts your signal. And so you can make it a lot further than you would just from where you're standing. And most areas have repeaters set up if you know where they are. So mines have been programmed for my area so that I can, for example, get into Salt Lake Valley because there's these mountains in the way, but through the repeater, I can get there. It tells you, you know, it has the details in here, how to hook the solar panel up to charge or recharge your battery, all of that kind of information. This will all be uploaded, so you can just download this and kind of plug in your own information and make it work. So, okay, now let me get back to this one. Okay. Slideshow. So this is in here. Oh, this is the next one in line. This is the long range, high frequency, you know, get around the world, kind of the simplified.
So is that for broadcasting and listening, or just listening?
Yeah, this is ham radio, so it's for both.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, in theory, ham radio takes a license. In practice, in an emergency situation, people without a license are allowed to broadcast. But that would be, they're, you know, considered short duration. And without a license, you know, you may not have the skill and kind of the understanding to be able to do what you want to do. So again, I'm going to jump ahead. So now where did I go? I didn't mean to click on that one. Okay. So continuing along, you got to build a plan, get your equipment, then you got to share it. And then you need to practice. Okay. So then the next question is so why get a ham radio license? You know, a lot of these things don't take one. And it may be that in your situation, you don't need it. You know, monitoring is good enough. If I can hear, I'm happy. Or if there's a good ham radio operator in my neighborhood, then I can rely on him. But I would argue that it's a skill that is important. It's a preparedness skill, and you need to learn and practice it. And going through ham radio will give you that learning and that practice so that you can be able to communicate effectively. Ham radio doesn't take any infrastructure. There's no wires. There's no power need. I mean, you run off battery. There's no public grid. You can talk person to person around the world. It's portable. You can pack it up and take it with you, and it'll work when everything else doesn't. And if you've stored it in EMP proof cans, etc., then you'll have it even if an EMP happens. So how do you get a license? There are 3 license levels. Technician is the entry level, and that allows you to communicate on the handhelds with some very limited on the HF bands. Then general gives you probably 60-70% of the privileges on the HF, and extra gives you 100% of the privileges. I would encourage everybody to at least get their general so they can communicate on the HF frequencies. A license, when you get it, is valid for 10 years and can be renewed for, subsequent 10 years without any testing. So once you have it, if you keep it renewed, you don't have to do anything else to maintain it. It's inexpensive, usually under $40 to get through it. The technician license, for example, that the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL, is the national organization that administers and takes care of this and does all our training and whatnot. They publish a question pool, 423 questions. They're in 10 or 12 categories. You'll only have 35 questions on the tests. You got to get 74 to pass, but those questions are all published. So you can literally study the questions if you're good at that. General license is similar, 35 questions out of 454, extras a few more. Technician is primarily some very basics about radio fundamentals and a lot about licensing, what you can and can't do, frequencies, those kind of things. It's not complicated. I originally got my license because I was a varsity scout coach back in the 80s. We didn't have cell phones, and we were, hiking mountain peaks and going on camps in the Uintas without a way to talk home. So I actually took my entire varsity team and we went down and went through the ham radio classes together, and about 5 or 6 of them got their license with me. And then we carried ham radios wherever we went and always knew the repeaters, so we could, they had what's called an auto patch back in the day that allowed you to punch codes on your phone that would actually dial a telephone. They had a telephone interface at the tower, and you could call home and talk to home when you were sitting on Kings Peak, for example. Before cell phones, that was really cool. Now, who needs it, right? But volunteer examiners conduct the exams in most major cities every few months. I know Salt Lake and Provo both have testing centers, are the ones I know of. It's a $14 charge. I think that may be going up. I think the government decided that we're not paying enough. But you pay the fee to take the test, and you can take one or more tests. If you pass the technician and you want to go ahead and take the next and the next, you can jump up. In the old days, you had to learn Morse code, and that was the biggest block to people learning or getting their license. But they dropped that requirements many years ago. And it's just, you can either go through the material and learn it, or you can just memorize questions if you want. Like I say, I've got an 8-year-old granddaughter that's studying to take the exam. So
would you recommend studying Morse code still?
After you get your license, there's certain frequencies where they do that, and it's valuable to know. Okay. I have to admit that I'm not sure I could take Morse code dictation anymore. I'd need to practice.
Yeah, I don't. I used to a long time ago.
Yeah, I had to pass a 5-word per minute test and did that. And then, general was a 15-word per minute. But I'm an extra class, but I did my general and extra after they dropped the requirements. So it was pretty straightforward.
But there are certain channels that communicate with Morse code. So
they're designated. There's a chart here. You could see that. Each band has certain areas that by agreement, it's not licensed, it's by agreement. They say, this is for voice, this is for TV. Yes, we can do TV. This is for computer communication. There's all kinds of fun new stuff you can do hooking your computer up, and this is for Morse code. And so, and there's fun awards. There's like the Workdoll States Award or Workdoll Countries Award or 100 Country Award, where if you can make contact and record it, the ARL gives out a nice award that's kind of fun, but for somebody that gets into that. So that's good. So when it comes to studying, there's a couple of, these are iPhone apps, but I assume they exist on Android as well. The Ham Radio Exam Tech app is a free one. The hamstudy.org, it costs $3.99, and there's a website that goes with it. It's really good. Couple of YouTube, there's tons of stuff out there, but I've just listed two. This is the first one's a real good overview. It's kind of a 1-hour crash course, get you through it. But the best one is this second one. It's the one that's sponsored by the ARRL, Dave Kessler. He's an old grandpa. He does a real good job of explaining things simply and going through the concepts. It's about 5.5 hours total if you do the whole thing. And then there's a nice manual that goes with it. One caveat is this, the current question pool changes in July 1. So you might, you get the apps because they'll update automatically, but you might wait on the manual because there'll be a 5th edition that has the new question pool.
How often do they change the question pool?
Oh, it's every 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's not too often. So say 2 choices of study. One is to actually read through the material and then go through the tests and give you good basic knowledge. I got one son-in-law that's just good at memorizing. All he did was go through the app and take the practice questions. And if he missed a question, then he, it tracks what you missed and takes you back to it. Then he just memorized the answers and went down and took the test. So I'm probably a combination of both. There were some concepts I really wanted to know. I studied in depth, and others I said, I just need to memorize that. I'm not going to chase down that rabbit hole. So I just memorized the answer and then took the test. So if you listen to the YouTubes, go through the practice questions, it really is pretty straightforward. So, all right. And for example, if I go back, I want to share something different. Go here. I can show you. Need to share. Okay, it is this one I still want to share. Sorry, I'm used to listening and not presenting that often. So for example, in the files that I send out will be this Dave Kessler Technician License Series checklist, something my daughter found and put together. So it goes through chapter 1, 20 minutes, how to get your license, references the book, and there's a couple of videos. So it shows that in 5.5 hours, you can have watched the videos, gone through the book and the practice questions and been there, but you get an idea of the topics that are covered. There's some fun things. I mean, we can talk to the space shuttle. There's always a ham radar on the space shuttle, and they designate certain times when they will, when it's overhead, communicate. You need an antenna that you can directionally point at it, but they'll send and receive answer calls from, people on the ground. At one point I had fun, had some big giant antennas that you could directionally, with the handhelds, with some good power, you'd point it at the moon and you'd bounce it off the moon and talk to somebody around the earth. There are ham radio satellites in space that you can communicate with to get around and do things. Ham radio has been at the forefront of, communication development. That was its purpose, was to provide an alternate means of communication. And ham radio operators, there's volunteer organizations where you go run, races and parades, and when the sheriff's office goes out on call, there's usually a bunch of ham radio operators that go to back them up, because that's the purpose of the licensing and whatnot, is to do that. So anyway, I can walk through some of these kits if you want. We could go outside and look at some of the antennas. What?
So yeah, as far as antenna go, like, so you gave those examples of the kits that you have for your local children versus a little bit farther away.
Yes.
For the farther away ones, do you need additional antenna, or like, what are the antenna for? Just for long distance, across the state?
Yes. So for example, in the kit for the handheld, I give there's a recommendation to get a bigger, longer antenna to go on the handheld radio that lets it communicate a little further. If you look up on my ceiling, actually, you see hanging there with some wires that aren't hooked up at the moment is a directional antenna that I hook into my handheld to communicate to some of the repeaters and get further. You don't need that in the emergency kit, but in the HF, the around the world one, this wire is 75 feet long, and this is called an NFED antenna. It allows you to broadcast on 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meter bands without a tuner because it's been specially built to do that. And that's what I recommend in the kit. But, if you get into ham radio, what I should do, what did I do with my phone? I go outside, I can show you a couple of these in action. So I'm going to mute here and bring it up on the phone and walk outside, and we'll show you some antennas outside. I got to find, where is the link to get onto the Zoom?
So for example, with like Tracy that's in Oregon and she's wanting to communicate with Ogden, like she's going to need the long distance kit that you recommend,
Yes.
plus a good antenna. Or is the antenna listed in that?
It's listed in the kit. It's part of the kit.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So, all right, come on. Where's Learning Zion? I got to find the link here to start it on my phone. I should just look on Wednesday night. There we go. Okay, I'm going to mute here. So okay. Yeah. So I'm just going to go outside. How do I tell it to go outside? There we go. Oh, this is out on my back porch, but so you got the garden started. But if you look, there's this tall vertical antenna here with a bunch of wires on top.
Mhm.
That's a multi-band HF vertical that generally has better send and receive characteristics than the single long wire. But again, you got to have mounting poles and you got to spend a little more money, and it's not portable. Whereas that one I have, you can hook up, and you can see it here. This is a different, I've got hooked here, you got your antenna wire coming up, and then that long wire, this is the different one, is strung out to a flagpole out on the other end of the property. And it's a multi-band NFED. And I use that. I have a switch, I can switch between it, and gives me the ability to try the vertical versus this long wire. In this case of the long wire, the higher you put the wire up to what they call quarter waves. So on 80 meters, that would be 20 meters or about 80 feet in the air. It works better. Then they have what's called the Yagis, which is the big ones you see that look like you're pointing at something.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be rotated, and what it does is it directs the energy in the direction that those beams are set up. So that's but again, those aren't portable. So that NFED long wire is my recommendation for portability, because you can, like I say, this isn't 20 feet or what did I say, 60 feet in the air. It's just maybe 15, 20 feet. And it's not as efficient as if it were higher, but it actually does better closer to the ground in this case to get to communicate with people in Wyoming and Logan, because they're actually in what's called the shadow. The beam would bounce over their head, but because this is close to the ground, it bounces more straight up and down.
Okay.
Anyway, that's a look at some base station kind of antennas.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, what other questions? Okay. That's turned off. I don't know. Yeah, so this is good to get feedback. What questions do you have? Anything else you'd like to see?
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, I'm gonna have to like dive through like that shopping list and everything that you've got there, and just kind of see exactly what I need. I've like 3 or so lessons into the ham radio course that I'm
Okay.
taking.
That's good.
It's on hamradioprep.com. But I mean, the first lesson, I was like in so deep. I was like, it's a totally new language, and I was like so frustrated. But I'm excited to get further into it, get kind of a grapple on it, and then have somebody to like bounce questions off of when they come up when I'm studying and everything. This has been really great because it answered all the questions that I had as far as like location, because I really do feel prompted to buy some of the equipment right now, even though I might not know fully how to use it yet.
Yeah,
Just while prices and
some simple instructions, you could probably fumble through it in an emergency.
Yeah. And then, continue on. But with the way prices are and shipping and who knows what, I just want to get things secured and bought right now. But so as far as like local groups and stuff, I know that there's different clubs and ham radio things all the time. I haven't looked at the ones around me, but is there like a national registry? Like once you get your license, everybody signs into that?
So the ARRL.org, if you go to that website, there is a way to look up local clubs.
Gotcha.
And there tends to be clubs everywhere. So you should be able to. And Cameron, I'm going to send you a link to this Google Drive with the stuff in it. So you can create a place on Learning Zion and then share that with everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So as far as those like antennas, like in your backyard and stuff, like which ones are like shareable? Are they all hardwired, or like can neighbors use like kind of band together and split the cost between a common antenna kind of a thing?
So there is a cable that goes from each of those antennas into my station here.
Gotcha.
And you'd have to run a different cable to the neighbor's house and then unscrew and screw in theirs. You can't share them at the same time. You'd have to run your own cable to it. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
So it's better just to help at least one person in the community get it all locked down and trained and stuff, and just gonna have that communication hub for like the small town of Malta, for example. Like I know of 2 other people that have their ham radio license and stuff, but anyway, I had never even heard of what a ham radio was until recently, and so it's just kind of interesting to like, what do we do in an emergency situation? How do we communicate, up and down the Wasatch Front or whatever? Which brings up another question. So as far as like the church, does the church have a ham radio plan to kind of communicate with its members in a situation?
They did back when the Mexico earthquake happened in the 80s. I was part of that group, and the tallest building over at BYU had a bunch of ham radio, big antennas on it, and they had some base stations set up there. Went and monitored those, and then some buildings in Mexico and members had ham radio, and we got communication about the status of missionaries and whatnot. by voice, talking to the people down there. I haven't heard lately. The answer is I know they maintain a pretty good ham station, but I don't know what their I don't know about, I'm unaware of any stakes that have, stake radios with frequencies to talk to church. There may be some regional stuff, but I don't know.
Yeah, because on some of the emergency groups, like on Facebook, it's been a couple months since I had seen stuff, but there are still a few stakes that are calling a ham radio specialist, but I didn't, like, our stake doesn't have that at all. I don't think it ever has, but
we've had it. It's empty at the moment, but I still have a list of the ham radio operators in our stake. So, and I know many of them in this case, but our stake's so small that you get on a bike and make it to every spot in 10 minutes. So it's not quite the same need that some others have.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could dive into base stations and all of that, but this is about emergency communication. So I've given you a list of things that are easy to use and be available.
Yeah. So just kind of throwing the question out to everyone, like, how deep are you into ham radios? Like, are you looking at getting into it pretty soon? Are you looking at purchasing equipment, or like, where are you guys at in your ham radio journey?
I've already bought a couple of the little mobile ham radios.
The Baofeng?
I bought those. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I felt prompted to get those, even though it's just been in the back of my mind. I need to probably do this, but I didn't really want to go through getting a license. I have trauma from getting teaching licenses and all of that. So I don't like the tests. But I have that little yellow radio is not a great one, but there's some by the company Eton, I think it is. They're better. They come in better because I have a little backpack with radios so you could tune in and try to find AM stations with local news and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the Baofeng is not considered the highest quality, but for $100 they happen to cover. Technically they're not legal because technically you're not supposed to have a radio that you can broadcast, talk on the family radio system and these other systems and the CB channels,
right?
And ham channels, because you're not supposed to mix licensed and unlicensed. But the FCC has not shut them down, and so you can't buy a regular, expensive ham radio that'll cover the same things these will. So that's why they've been such a big item in preparedness, is because of what you can listen in on.
Right.
It gets the weather channel and all those kind of things as well. So
I don't even know how to use it, though. I remember pulling out the manual and I just put it back away.
Yeah. That's why I've taken the sheet I have and actually given step-by-step instructions, because even the radio operator took me watching some YouTube videos and whatnot to figure out how to tune it and whatnot.
I didn't even think of YouTube videos. My daughter always thinks of that. She can fix anything on a YouTube video.
Which is one of the other interesting things I've done is, when the power goes down, the internet's gone, we lose our YouTube to look things up. So one of the things I've taken to do is capturing, with the 4K downloader, I'll find a channel that's on preparedness or farming or whatever that I think would be important in preparedness. And then I'll go download all the videos on that channel and save them off to an external hard drive. And I actually have a bigger ammo can that has a laptop. It has several external hard drives, and it's just nothing but, thousands of hours of preparedness YouTubes that have been saved off and stored.
Just in case.
Just in case. So
I didn't get it. I'm on my phone, so I can't see the screen very well, but where do you get those big metal canisters?
The ammo cans, I put links in the document that Cameron will share. Some are available on Amazon. Some are sold nationally. They're Army surplus cans is what they are.
Right.
and I've listed specifically, it's called the Fat 50 because it's wider than the standard 50 caliber ammo can, and it gives you the room to get the solar panel and everything in it.
Okay.
I've given you links for everything in there, except for the nice little Cordura bag. The company that makes those doesn't make them anymore. So
Okay.
I have found an alternative, but it's not an essential component.
But you had to take the paint off all the cans?
So you don't have to take the paint off a whole can. It's just where the lid shuts.
Right.
The lid to make electrical contact with the top edge.
Got it.
It's just the very top edge, and then underneath where the electromagnetic seal goes, where you'll see when you get it, it's got a rubber seal, and you just get a hold of it, and the rubber seal comes out. And then I use a bit of the Dremel with a little sanding thing on it.
Oh, okay.
Do it. And if there's enough interest, I could probably search around and scrounge up cans and, do the sanding and put the seals on for people.
That's what we're doing for our next retreat. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Or if you're coming down for
Let's see,
like,
I'm coming to Utah in May.
education week. Yeah. We could put a bunch together.
Coming down I-15.
Like I've done all my kids, and my next younger brother's, got deeper into preparedness, and he came down and did 8 sets for his family. And so we spent
I would totally hire you to do that.
And I'd be happy to help.
Not lying.
So Cameron, maybe we look at that.
Yeah.
Education week or something. I'll keep watching for a supply there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can get them local cheaper, but they've been in short supply lately.
Yeah. I bet.
Can you get them at Smith and Edwards?
They very well may have. There's 2 different cans I list. One's for the VHF, the short range, and the other's a bigger one for the other one. And they would most likely have them there.
I used to live in Logan. That's my favorite store in the world anyway.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a good Army surplus store up in like Idaho Falls as well that we might be able to.
Yeah, there's a really good one.
This has all sounded good.
So anyway,
time to go shopping.
Some ideas of what's out there and what you might do.
For sure. Yeah. Any other questions before we wrap up?
I'm going to come to the class again tomorrow.
Yeah, me too.
I got to figure out what we should change then.
No, it takes me a while to sink it in.
Good. Okay. Well, thanks everyone.